Hey everybody! So, as promised, tonight we're going to be covering particle systems. Unreal has a really awesome particle system editor called Cascade. If you've used Unreal Engine 3, you're familiar with this. So, there's a lot to go over. All of these are a little bit different. This is not going to be in depth by any means. We're going to look at a few of the available particle systems and how to put them together, and then if we have time, we might look at some of the neater ones like a sub UV particle system. But for now, we're going to look at just your standard particle systems, GPU particles, ribbon particles, and beam data. So I've got a few of these already set up, but there's a few things we should do first. One is let's just go ahead, and I'm just going to make one of these just make one new. We're going to make some sparks real quick. And so I've got a few of what I'm going to make tonight in the viewport already so you can see it. Um, this is a little chaotic. So the first thing I'm going to do is make something kind of like what you see here with the sparks kind of swirling around. Nice little light effect there. And we'll get to the other chaos and crazy in the background soon. So whenever you're going to create a new particle, the first thing you'll do is navigate to the directory that make sure you put it in the right spot. I've got this particle directory that I've set up. So you can right click in that folder, and particle system is one of the things that under create basic assets that you can make. So I'm going to create a particle system. I always prefix these with a P for particles, just makes it easier to search for. Underscore and then whatever the name of it's going to be, and I've already got Sparky, so we'll just call this one Sparks. And so now to actually edit it, we need to open this guy up. And initially, we're not going to see much. This is what we'll see at first. It's just these little X, Y, and Z axis things floating up in the air. So this, if you've never seen it before, is the Cascade Editor. This is an incredibly powerful tool that you can do a lot of really amazing things with. And we'll go over some of this real quick. It looks like there's a lot here, and there is, but thankfully it's all organized very well, so it's easy to find. The first thing we have is our toolbar. Our toolbar is just our most commonly used tools, so like save, finding content browser, that kind of good stuff. Here we've got our viewport, and in our viewport we can actually look at, we've got a number of options for the different things we can look at, and how we're actually looking at them. We can turn on things that are off by default, like vector fields, which we'll talk about when we get to GPU particles. Uh, and then over here in our emitters, a particle is made of any number of emitters. Generally, most particles that you see are a particle system. You're never, if you have a fire or something like that, you have one emitter that's handling the flame, another one that's doing heat distortion, and another that is doing smoke, and then possibly another that might be doing extra effects like the sparks we're going to make here. Uh, so the emitters consist of the emitter block here, and then any number of modules, which are these guys down here. They give particle systems their behaviors. So the particle behavior is determined by these modules, and sort of what it looks like, but what it looks like is mostly based on the material you use. So we're not going to go over creating materials. I'll show you some of the materials that I've made. I don't want to spend too much time going over them because materials are a whole nother beast that we may or may not tackle in the near future. So there's always going to be a few things that we need to think about, and the first one is what is it that we're trying to do. And in this case, we're going to attempt to make a spark, or something that looks like sparks that would come out of fire, not necessarily electrical sparks. Those look a little bit different. So the first thing we need to do is actually get a material on this so that it will look kind of like the way we want it to, so that we can start getting it closer to what we want. So uh, in the required module, you'll see here we've got material and it says default particle. And I've already got one set up. So I'm just going to click in the little box here and I'm going to search for spark. We have, I believe it's this one. It is. Excellent. So let me actually open the material for that real quick. I'd like to. This is one of the ones I wanted to show you guys and talk about a little bit. So there's nothing special with this material here. It's a radial gradient exponent, which is giving us this what you see here on this ball, and then a particle color, and we're just multiplying the alpha channel by the diffuse, and then we're plugging that into emissive color and opacity. And so another important thing to note is that the blend mode set to translucent, and the shading model set to unlit. It doesn't need to be lit. It's actually going to wind up being crazy emissive when we're done with it. That's part of why we've set this material up the way we did and plugged it into emissive color. So we'll go back over here to the sparks, and now it's time to start making this thing actually look a little bit more like a spark. So in our required module, you're always going to see things here like screen alignment, the emitter rotation, and emitter origin. Emitter origin is exactly what it sounds like. It just moves the emitter around, and that's useful if you're making a complex particle system that's made of many different parts that are positioned around each other. For example, if you're making an explosion, the smoke probably isn't going to come from the base of the explosion. The shock waves certainly wouldn't. These are going to need to be positioned a certain way. And same thing with the rotation. You can create particle systems that have been rotated a ridiculous amount to the point where it almost doesn't do anything. Um, so let's see. We don't really need to worry about anything else that's going on down here for now. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to go to spawn. Actually, first thing we should do is probably rename our emitter block here. Notice it's still named particle emitter. That's pretty bad. Let's just name this sparks. That's all we really need to do here. So I'm going to go to spawn, and in spawn this is going to deal with how many particles spawn. So it's set to a constant of 20. I'm going to knock this down to 10 for now. And then that lifetime looks good for now. Although let's leave the minimum at 1 and let's set the maximum to like 2. So it still doesn't look like much. It looks like puffs of smoke, but this is where we're gonna fix that. So we're gonna mess with the overall size of this. So let's knock this down to like 5. Leave that. And then 5 and 5. Nope. Let's try it a different way. Maybe 1 and 1. Then 25 on the Z. Okay, yeah. Oh. Huh, that still doesn't look right to me. I want them to be a little bit longer. So let's set this to like, I don't know, 50? It didn't seem to have much effect. And now I've lost it. If you lose your particle, you can hit F to reframe it. Okay. So let's keep playing with this and get this into the shape we want. So that didn't work for us. I'm going to go back and look at what I set that at earlier. 2, 10, and 2. All right, that's what I thought. Wonder if I set those. No, 2, 10, and 2. All right, let's keep playing with it. So we don't really need any velocity on the X and, well, actually no. Let's keep some velocity on the X and Y just to keep the randomness going. We're going to wind up spreading this out. Okay, so first thing I need to do, I forgot to do this. This is why this isn't working. Is over here in the screen alignment, because I want this to be affected by velocity, I need to actually set the screen alignment to velocity. It was set to square, and you can actually see that if we go to wireframe, if I set that back to square, and see that it's, I don't know if you can see that it's tiny little red squares. Um, but basically, it's just emitting a bunch of 2D planes that have an image on them. So I'm going to set that to velocity, and then they're actually affected by how quickly they move. So I'm going to go back to lit. So now we're starting to get the shape that we wanted. So the next thing I want to do is I want to go to the lifetime module, and here I'm actually going to set the max lifespan to 3. We'll leave the minute 1. So the next thing I need to do is we're going to go to initial size, and then I think these are good values for now, but I kind of want to cut my X and Z values down a little bit. I think those look more like rice than sparks. It's a little bit better. So now I want to give these guys a little bit more color, and so here we're going to go to color over life. Oh, a few important things that I skipped earlier. On your emitter block here, we've got a couple of different buttons we can hit. So this first one, the check mark, turns the emitter on and off, which is really useful when you have multiple emitters and you're trying to work on just one. This changes the display mode, so here you see it's emitting dots now, and here it's emitting little crosses, and now it's off, and then we're back to this. And then this S is, oh god, what's the word I'm looking for? Uh, it's basically quarantine mode. It turns off all the other emitters that you have out and lets you single out this one and work on just it. Second thing is these check marks here next to your modules. These turn that module on and off. And then the little graph here will actually, if you press that button, it'll put those curves down here on your curve editor, which will allow you to adjust those curves. So if you've done any animation or used any curve editors for anything else, you should be relatively comfortable with this. Most of what you do there you can do numerically through other inputs, so it's not entirely necessary to use. It is pretty easy though. So one of the things I want to do is I want to go to my color over life, and here I want to make sure that the distribution is set to vector constant curve, and it is. So the reason I want that is it gives me an RGB value that I can then make these sparks the color I want, and this is where this is where that material comes in that plugging those plugging these into the emissive color will allow me to actually overload the emissive or overload the color and make these glow very brightly. Well, they don't have to be bright. So we're going to start at point zero. So this is the beginning of the particle's life. And for our out value, the out value is the one we actually care about here. We can either pick something from in here, or I'm just going to do this down here in my RGB value. So I'm going to go 50, 5, and 0. And see, now we've got these nice glowing little streaks out here. So I'll hit OK. And then I'm going to go down to 1 here, which is going to be the nearing the end of the particle's life. And then, let's make this it's a little bit too glowy. I'm going to go back to my original one up here, and let's turn this actually down to 5. That's too yellow now. Let's make that 10. Get that kind of more reddish. I think we lost some of it by blowing out the actually like the yellow more, but this is a little too much. There we go. That's pretty nice. Okay, so we're starting to get there. There's a bit more we need to do to really make this look pretty good. So now we should get to an important part, which is adding new modules to your particle system. So to do that, you just right click, and the module that I want to add here is a location module. So I'm going to go to location, and this is initial location. I'm going to click on initial location, and then I want to come down here under the start location, and I want to set the max values. So for X, I'm going to go, let's try 30, and then 30 for the Y, and Z can stay at 0. And then for our min values, let's do a negative range of -30 and -30, and then 0 again. So now we have this spread out a little bit more. It's getting a little bit more useful. So, but I want these to swirl around a bit more. They're not quite behaving like sparks do. So to fix that, we're going to come in and we're going to add an orbit module. And an orbit module does exactly what it sounds like. And I don't even really need to adjust it. That actually looks really freaking good with default values. I could play with that and I could make it more chaotic. I could make them orbit in more directions. But for right now, this looks pretty good. So these guys still aren't moving correctly, though. We need them to accelerate more as they rise. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to give them another module. We're going to look for an acceleration module, and we want constant acceleration. So in constant acceleration, I'm going to come in here, and then this will let me adjust the acceleration in the different directions. So here I want to affect the acceleration going up, so I'm going to set the Z to 100. There we go. That looks much, much better. So the last thing that I want to do, and this is a really neat thing, is uh, particles used to not be able to light the surfaces around them. You could attach a light to an object that also had a particle emitter, but particles themselves wouldn't actually cast any light. But now, uh, at least for these kind of particles, there is a new module called light that does exactly what it sounds like. Um, so you add the light module to it, and what will happen now is this will actually light an area around it. And you can see that if I come back over here and hit play, um, you can see that as these get near the floor, each one's got a relatively bright amount of light that comes with it. Um, and so this is pretty simple, and I did this without making any actual textures. I just strung together a material in the material editor real fast. And I mean, it's pretty cool. You could adjust that a little bit and make something that's like fireflies or weird little demon fairies or whatever you really want with that. So the next thing we're going to look at is the same thing but a GPU material. So a GPU material or a GPU particle. So that's what this mess of crazy here is. So particles, this system looks good, but it's not emitting very much. And part of that's because the CPU is actually calculating most of these. A GPU particle allows us to get away with stuff like this, where this is emitting thousands of particles are going off in all kinds of crazy directions and swirling around. There's actually a very good example that I can open up real quick for you that comes in the starter content. And it's this really awesome spark particle, but this is a GPU particle. Um, and so you get away with tons and tons of particles, and it's very, very efficient. Whereas if you try to do this with this guy that we set up, it's going to it's going to be fairly resource intensive and probably crash. Well, not necessarily, but it's very likely it'll crash your system. So let's okay. Anyway, so let's go ahead and actually make a GPU spray or GPU particle real quick. Um, I'm going to go back to my directory, and what we're going to do. Oh, this is important. So right now there's no thumbnail for the spark particle we just made, and this is really easy to take care of. So you get your camera where you've got a good shot of the sparks or whatever it is you're trying to get a shot of. Sorry, I just feel like futzing with the graph here. Anyway, wow, that's kind of cool. Okay, anyway, so once you have the camera where you want it, or where you think it's good, and just hit the thumbnail button, and we come back over to our come back over here, we'll see that we've got an image there. So we're going to use the particle I just made as a starting point for the next one. So I'm going to duplicate this, and I will call this p sparks underscore GPU. And so now let's open this guy up. So you might have noticed this little gap here in between the emitter block and the modules. So in here, if I right click, I can go to type data, and this is a new thing to Unreal 4, and it's pretty cool. So I'm going to hit new GPU sprites, and right away we see that something's wrong. An emitter has modules that are incompatible with this data type. The particle system has no fixed bounding box and contains a GPU emitter. So we're gonna take care of these are two separate problems here. The first one is that light is not compatible with GPU sprites. GPU sprites send out hundreds to thousands of sprites, and if each one of those was lit, it would just be bad. So we're going to right click on light and we're going to delete module, and we're starting to get our particle back. So now the bounding box problem is easy to fix. Up here where it says bounds, if we click on this, we see that our bounds is just this tiny little guy right here. So if I click on the bounds options, I can hit set fixed bounds, and it fixes that bounding issue for me. And I can turn that off. So now it's time to actually start playing with this guy. Let's just make this kind of crazy. So I'm gonna go to spawn, and we're gonna go from 10 particles to 500. So now we got this big mess of particles rising up out of there. Now we can play with this a little bit. One of the things we need to do is I said that I was going to talk about the vector. Uh, oh nuts! Vector data. So I'm not going to get in how to make this. You make these in whatever 3D modeling package you have is like Maya. But you can get vector data out of there, which is like flow data. And I've got some available. Where? All right, let's look at the one I made earlier. I apologize. I don't honestly do a lot of particles. It's not really a part of level design. This is uh, mostly by special request. So I've had to step up my game a little bit. Oh, duh. Okay, I forgot. I need to actually add the local vector field to it. So I can come down to vector and go to local vector field. And so now I can load one in, and it'll give me a spot here to do it. So I can just click on the little arrow, and I've got these guys here. But I'm going to pick noise 94. And so this box that you see here, what this does is this is essentially an area of influence or force that will affect the particles inside of it once we have it set up. And we affect that by adjusting the intensity and the tightness and the position of the box. So the intensity is the effect that it has, and the tightness is a value between 0 and 1. So like if I set this to 1, see how they gather near the bottom. And so you can use this to make a number of different effects. And you can move the box. You can adjust the size of the box too. Let's just make this 30 and make that 0. So in the relative scale 3D, that's where we can adjust the overall size of this. I'm actually going to make this box a little bit taller. Let's make this like 3. That's too tall. Let's do 1.5. That actually doesn't really appear to be having that much effect. Okay, let's actually just set that down to 0.5. We don't need it to be that tall. But I'm going to adjust it on the X and Y just to see if I can get a slightly different effect out of it. The X scale didn't seem to matter that much. Okay, so now we can start playing with things like our orbit module, our constant acceleration, to kind of get more effects we want. So I'm gonna come into my offset. Oh, fun trick here. If you're, instead of opening each one of these arrows one at a time, if you know you need to get in the root of something, you can hold shift and click one of these arrows. It will unload everything, and then you can get in here and adjust whatever you need to. So let's give this, let's actually increase the Y offset here to 100. Just make that really nice, big, sweeping arc. But let's do the same thing on the X just for fun, like 50. I'm just going to make these swirl everywhere like a crazy particle tornado. And then for min, let's do the offset just to see. This could be fun. Get things swirling all over the place in different directions. There we go. That's actually pretty cool. So, um, oh, that's kind of neat. So GPU sprites are really awesome in that you can get effects like this that are very intense. That uh, even like 5 6 years ago would have been very resource intensive. And these are relatively efficient as far as these things go. So the next thing I wanted to look at. Oh, before you close anything, make sure you've hit saved if you want to keep your hit save if you want to keep your work. So one of the things I wanted to look at, and I don't know if we're going to have time to make both this and a beam, and I really want to show you guys the beam. This is two different kinds of particle systems here. We have what's called mesh data, and then I'm using ribbon data to make the little smoke trail behind it. So mesh data actually uses a mesh, and I can insert any mesh in here that I want. Let's. I think it's got a. Oh yeah, here we go. So couch, I believe. Let's add a new material to that. Actually, wait. I think that couch has the material it needs on it. Let's find out. I'm actually curious about this. So let's go out here and let's grab my mesh emitter and throw it in here. And I want to see if that's spitting out couches. Yep. Holy crap. So, so now we have a bunch of flaming couches shooting out of the ground. Oh, that's thoroughly entertaining. Um, so let's look at a minute at how I put that together. So the first thing you have to do is make it mesh data, and you do that by right clicking and then going to type data and selecting new mesh data. Then inside your mesh data, you can select the mesh that you want. Um, let's grab that rock I had. I believe that was one of these guys. It doesn't matter which one. Let's grab this one. The general effect I was going for was like rocks after an explosion or something like that. with a little bit of smoke trailing behind them. So uh, the the velocity over life is what I'm using to make them arc. I could have gotten away with doing something similar with just initial velocity and lifetime, but the problem with that was when they went to come back down, the rocks were traveling at what felt like far too slow a rate. And if I sped it up, they went through their arc without slowing down as they reached the top. So I used a velocity over life to help affect the way that that looked. And then it's hard to see, but there's a rotation over life going on, and it's very small. That's just causing these guys to rotate as they spin through the air. And this sphere here, if I go down to the bottom of it and turn the 3D draw mode on, this is actually where these are emitting from. And so you find that under location, and there's a lot of different locations here. I picked sphere, and now this will emit from any part of the sphere. And as far as the smoke trail goes, with the ribbon data can be used for a number of things. If you've played the remake they did of Shinobi for the PlayStation 2, they had this cool thing where as you dashed around the screen, his the little ninja's belt was like a red kind of streak of light that would just kind of streak back and forth across the screen. And that's essentially what ribbon data here is. So what this is doing is it's creating a trail in the form of a ribbon. So we've got sheets per trail, which is just basically how many texture sheets it should use per trail. I've got it set to 5. And then your max trail count and max particle in trail count. Right now I've got these both set fairly high. Ideally, I would sit here and adjust these to get the effect that I want. But in this instance, I felt like they worked fine and they look good, so that's really all that mattered. The one thing to attach these to the rocks, though, I needed to use this source module here. Um, and the source module is what allows me to attach the ribbon trail to the rocks themselves. So in our source here, you see we've got our source method, and here it's going to usually be set to default. So you set it to particle, and the source name has to be the name of the emitter. So my emitter's name is rock, so the source name is rock. Um, and then the only other and then you that's all you need to do there, and you will have ribbons that follow your chunks of debris as they fly around. um, the cool thing about mesh emitters is that you can make them work with collision and things like that also, so as they emit meshes you can have them like hit and bounce a few times. So the very last thing I wanted to talk to you guys about was the beam emitter. And I can't take credit for this part. Uh, this came from somebody else, and I will give them credit before the stream is over. Um, but beam particles are this is another new thing, and these are awesome. So it's exactly what it sounds like. It's beams of various kinds, and you can see here in the editor, I've got this kind of like Tesla coil arc going. And we're going to look at how that got put together, and what you need to do to create something like this. Um, so we'll get started on that in just a
In
second.
this lesson, we're going to learn how to use
So this, by the way, this particle was originally created by one Joshua Kinney. Um, so for this guy here, this might be easier if we just start fresh. So I'm going to create a new particle, call this one P underscore beam emitter. I'm going to go ahead and open this guy up. So first thing I'm going to do is I know I want a beam, so I'm going to set my type data to new beam data. And now I'm going to get my material in. So let's go for, I think I named it beam. Yep, matte beam. So you can see it kind of flashing here, and this is what we get initially. So it's not that useful to us yet. But this is really cool. This is for doing like laser effects, like actual like laser weapons and the effects for them. This in conjunction with Blueprint, you can do some really amazing things. But for now, we're just going to do electricity arcing between 2 points. So we've got our beam material on, and now the next thing we need those 2 points for it to arc between. So in order to do this, we need to go into our beam data, and right now it's set to target. We're actually going to set this to distance. Awesome. So the next thing I want to do is I want to set the speed to 0. We're just going to have this be its full length. We don't need it to grow to length. Just have it be the size it's going to be initially. So next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to lifetime, and I'm actually going to set the min and max lifetimes to 0. And that way it'll stop with that epilepsy inducing flashing, and it'll just stay where it's at. So I'm going to go back to beam data, and under distance I'm going to set the constant. Let's start with 500 and see what that looks like. All right. Right now it just looks like a big long light. So we'll keep it there for now. So now I want to go to initial size, and let's set the mins and maxes on all of these to 2. I think I hit tab before I hit 2. There we go. And 2, 2, and 2. So we get this nice thin beam like this. So now, because we're using beam data, we actually have a special module category called beam that we wouldn't have otherwise. So to get that effect that I had that's like lightning or electricity, we're actually going to use noise for that. So I'm going to select noise from here. And in noise, the first thing I want to do is I want to check to make sure that low frequency is enabled. This will allow the range here. So now I'm going to set the frequency to 10. And so you can see we have like a crooked line now. It's getting there. So now under distribution, center noise range. Here I'm going to select distribution vector uniform. And then in here, let's start with 30 across the board in the X, Y, and Z. There we go. And then for the mins, we're going to do negative 30, negative 30, and negative 30. Okay, cool. Okay, so now we got that zap in between 2 points. We're getting there. I'm going to go up to my beam data, and we're going to play with our max beam count. Right now it's 1, so it's one beam that's just sort of getting zapped around a bit. So let's set it to 3 and increase the intensity of what's going on. So the next thing I'm going to do is, because we're having this arc between 2 points. I need one to be the source. I'm going to add that, but I'm also going to need a target. So I'm going to add both those modules now. Let's go into source. Um, and in our source rollout here, which thankfully is already opened, under my constant, I'm going to set my x to, let's go like negative 300 and then 0 and 0. Notice that it doesn't really appear to have done much, but what we're doing is we're placing our starting and ending points, because this is going to let us do some really cool things. So now under source tangent, let's see, we'll go 0, 0, and then I want this to sort of rise on the Z or arc a little bit. So let's start with 40. We won't see anything just yet. So part of the reason is there's no interpolation points, so we can have as many tangents as we want. It's not going to do anything because there's only 2 points. So I need to go back to beam data and interpolation points here. I'm going to set this to 10. I'm going to give this more to work with. Oh, and another thing that's important is under our source tangent method here, I actually need to set this to user set, as otherwise it's just not going to do anything. And I'm going to need to do the same thing in target when I get there. So right now we've got this halfway there. We're almost there. So under target, let's see, I did negative 300, so we're going to do 300, 0, and 0. And then I'm going to come down to distribution. We're going to go 0, 0, 40 here also. And then user set. Okay, that's cool, but I think let's set that to negative 40. And setting it to negative 40 will make an arc there, where right now it's making part of a wave. So there we go. So I'm going to delete color over life, and instead what we're going to do is we're going to have an initial color. So color, initial color. I'll move this up with my other initials. To move any of these guys around, if you're an organizational freak, you just click and drag on it, right click. So for this, I can really pick any color I want. So let's open up our distribution here, and let's see. Let's go 0, 0 red, and like 0.2 green, but then like 500 blue. Whoa! Okay, let's go like 50 blue. Let's get that a little closer to like a white color, and that 50 is too much. Let's go maybe 10. So here we're doing the same thing we did with the with the with the very first particle we did, the sparks, where we're overloading the emissive to get this glowing effect. That's a little too blue. It should probably be lighter than that. Oh, that's awesome. So let's actually tone that down a bit. Let's go 5. That would make that about 4.7. and that would make this about 2.2. There we go. So as you can see, these are really neat, and there's a lot of really cool effects you can make with each one of these. And there's a few that I'm not gonna have time to go over. But if you've used animated particles in Unity, that's essentially what sub UVs are in Unreal. Well, a texture sheet animation in Unity for a particle is similar, although not quite the same thing, and the ones in Unreal are quite a bit more in depth. But if you can create particle systems in Unreal, and if you can work within the editor here, you can easily make particles in other engines. Comparatively, Unity's is a much more dumbed down version of this that doesn't have nearly as much that it can do, but it's still, it's definitely cool for what it is. One side thing before I go is if you want to, so I showed you guys an emitter that had, or a system that had multiple emitters, but I actually never showed you how to do that. If you just right click over here in empty space, you can select as many new emitters as you have that you need to work with. And also, if you need to delete them, you can just select and then delete. You just hit delete on your keyboard. All right, well, that's all I've got for tonight. From now on, all of these are going to be more level design related. So the next task is going to be to make a level in for the new Unreal tournament. I'm probably going to start with a capture the flag map because that's my favorite kind of gameplay. Um, the balance for something like that can be a little tough, so we're going to start initially with a symmetrical map, and then later I might make a an asymmetrical map for a different game style. um, and then there's a good chance that down the road we'll probably dive into making an open world environment, and for that I'll use Arc, and we'll create something that will go into Arc and potentially go on the Steam Workshop. Anyway, thank you for watching. Have a great night, and I'll talk to you guys next week.